What would it take for a billionaire CEO to leave behind his sleek designer suits, his polished office, and step into the very store he owns disguised in nothing more than a simple baseball cap? What if no one recognized him? Not the cashiers, not the security guard, and certainly not the manager who was supposed to be running this place. Was this a routine visit, or was Marcus Thompson about to step into a world of secrets hidden beneath the glossy corporate facade he spent years building? Could he truly understand what his employees face, confined to the back rooms and overlooked corners of his empire? Or was he about to learn, in the most shocking way possible, that the world he thought he knew was crumbling right under his nose? Stay with me, because what Marcus is about to discover will shatter everything he believes about leadership, and might just change the way you look at the workplace forever. The real question is, how deep does the rot go, and how much of it is he responsible for? The answers are coming, but first, let's step inside.
Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I have missed you all, missed all the experiences we've had together. I need your support on YouTube now more than ever. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. And if you won't subscribe, kindly tell us why in the comments section. We will love to know. Now, back to the story.
As Marcus Thompson walked through the entrance, the automatic doors slid open with a quiet hum, and for a moment, everything felt ordinary. He took a slow breath and adjusted the baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the hum of conversation from the aisles mixed with the steady beep of registers. No one noticed him. The cashiers went about their duties, chatting with customers, scanning items with practiced ease. The security guard, stationed by the door, didn't even spare a glance. Not a single person, none of the staff who were supposed to keep the store running smoothly, recognized the billionaire CEO walking past them. He could have been anyone. Just another guy in a worn-out hoodie, trying to blend in. But beneath that calm exterior, Marcus's heart was pounding in his chest. His palms, tucked into the pockets of his jeans, were clammy. This wasn't a walk through a corporate headquarters or a quick visit to one of his boardrooms. No, this was different. The store, the very one he'd spent years building, was his reality check. A place where employees worked tirelessly, often unseen and unheard, where customer service was a mantra, but at what cost? A place where the numbers he saw on his glossy reports didn't always match the struggles playing out on the ground level. This was his chance to see it all, to uncover the truth that his well-meaning policies and flawless spreadsheets had been blind to. The power dynamics, the sacrifices, the hidden lives of his employees. Every footstep echoed on the shiny floor as he made his way deeper into the store, each click of his sneakers against the tile a reminder that he was now a stranger here, a stranger in his own empire. His mind raced with 1,000 questions, none of which had answers. How many of his employees were working multiple jobs just to get by? How many were sacrificing their time, their health, their dignity, and even their families for a company that prided itself on people first? Would the world he had built fall apart under the weight of its own hypocrisy? Or was he about to witness something that would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about leadership? With each step, the tension built. Every aisle he walked down, every face he passed, only added to the thick sense of anticipation that was slowly consuming him. The store looked perfect on the surface. Everything was where it should be. But beneath that polished exterior, things weren't adding up. And he could feel it, the quiet, gnawing sensation that something, somewhere, was very wrong.
What was he about to find? Could he handle the truth when it finally came crashing down? The answers were closer than he thought. As Marcus rounded the corner, his pulse quickened. The harsh fluorescent light overhead flickered for a second, casting long shadows on the aisles. Something, or someone, was waiting. He wasn't sure what, but he knew this would change everything. The question was no longer if he'd uncover something unsettling, but how deep the lie went, and who it was going to bring down. The store had no idea who was walking among them, but soon neither would Marcus. He was about to step into a hidden world, one that he had unknowingly helped build, and he wasn't sure if he'd be able to walk out the same person. Marcus had only been in the store for a few minutes, but already he could feel something wasn't right. The noise of the registers, the steady hum of the fluorescent lights, everything seemed normal at first. But then, as he walked past the restrooms, something caught his attention. A sound. Soft at first, almost too faint to notice, but it stopped him dead in his tracks. It was the kind of sound that made his blood run cold, a muffled sob, the kind you couldn't ignore. His eyes flicked to the restroom door, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. This wasn't just the usual stress of a busy store, the occasional outburst or frustration that came with the grind. No, this was something else. The sobs were raw, desperate, and filled with so much emotion that they sent a chill down Marcus's spine. This wasn't a fleeting moment of sadness. It felt like something much darker, something that went far beyond an ordinary breakdown. He stood frozen for a beat, his chest tightening as he listened. The sobbing continued, steady and heavy, echoing off the cold tile walls. Marcus felt the weight of it in his gut. He knew in that instant that he wasn't just about to witness something uncomfortable. He was about to uncover something that would shake him to the core. Steeling himself, he moved toward the door, his hand hovering over the handle for a moment. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to find, or what he was even prepared for, but his instinct screamed that this was important. Without thinking, he knelt down, his eyes dropping to the gap under the door. There, discarded carelessly on the wet tile, was something that made his stomach twist. A silver name badge. It glinted in the harsh light, lying forgotten on the floor like an afterthought, its sharp edges catching his eye. The name read, Maria Santos. It was the name of one of the custodial staff, a woman he'd never met before, but whose face he would now never forget. The badge was a sign, a small but unmistakable symbol that something was deeply wrong. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. It was the first sign that everything he thought he knew about his company, the one he had built, the one he thought was running smoothly, was crumbling beneath the surface. The sobs continued from behind the door, louder now, more fragmented. He could hear the pain in them, the exhaustion, the kind of grief that didn't fade easily. He could feel the weight of her despair, even through the thick barrier of the restroom door. This wasn't just an employee taking a break from the grind. This was someone who had reached the end of their rope, someone whose struggles were far deeper than what the store's polished image could ever reveal. Marcus's mind raced. What had he missed? How had he been so blind to this kind of suffering? All the reports he'd gotten from his managers, the glowing reviews about employee satisfaction, the promises of a family-first workplace, none of it had prepared him for this moment, for the raw emotion spilling from behind a door in his own store. His thoughts raced back to the time when he'd built Thompson Enterprises from the ground up. His mission had always been clear, to create a company that put people first. But this was a betrayal of everything he had worked for. And it wasn't just one employee. This one moment was the first crack in the foundation, the beginning of a truth he had been unwilling, or perhaps too afraid to face. He had no idea who Maria was or what had driven her to this breaking point. But one thing was certain: the story behind this sobbing woman was just the tip of the iceberg. And Marcus wasn't about to turn away. Whatever it took, he needed to understand.
The sobs began to slow, quieter now, but the silence that followed was even worse. It felt like a door was opening, not just in the restroom, but in Marcus's mind. A door that would lead him to something far worse than he could have imagined. It was time to find out what was really happening here. Marcus hesitated for just a moment, his hand resting lightly on the restroom door. The sobs had stopped, but the air was thick with a tension he couldn't ignore. He didn't know exactly what he was about to walk into, but something in his gut told him this wasn't just another worker taking a break. No, this was deeper, much deeper. With a soft but deliberate knock, he gently called out, "Excuse me, are you okay in there?" For a long beat, there was nothing but silence. He could feel the weight of those few seconds stretch into an eternity. And then, just as he was about to knock again, a shaky voice answered. It was small, strained, and barely above a whisper. But there was no mistaking the raw vulnerability in her tone. I'm fine. Just give me a minute." Marcus felt the instinct to push, to demand answers, but something in her voice made him pause. It wasn't fine. He could hear it in the wavering words, in the hesitation. He had seen countless people hide behind "I'm fine" over the years, but this wasn't that. This was the quiet cry of someone who had been through far too much and had nowhere else to turn. He stood there, unmoving for a long moment, before gently pushing the door open. It creaked softly as it swung inward, and what he saw caught him off guard.
Maria Santos stepped out from behind the door, her face a portrait of exhaustion. Her eyes were red, puffy from crying, but it wasn't just her appearance that struck him. It was the weight of everything she carried in those few seconds. She wore a wrinkled custodial uniform, its fabric stained from long hours of work, and her hands shook slightly as she reached down to pick up her silver name badge from the floor. She barely made eye contact with him, her gaze dropping quickly to the ground, as if afraid to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I shouldn't be. I need to get back to work." There it was again, the urgency, the fear of getting caught, the silent shame that clung to every word she spoke. But what hit Marcus hardest wasn't just the way she spoke. It was the quiet desperation that hung in the air around her, the sense that something had broken inside her and that nothing could put it back together. "Maria," Marcus said softly, stepping a little closer, careful not to overwhelm her. "Are you sure you're okay?" She glanced up at him then, her eyes meeting his for the briefest of moments before dropping again. He could see the pain there, buried beneath the exhaustion, the worry. And in that fleeting glance, he saw something else too, a person trying to hold it all together despite everything threatening to unravel. She opened her mouth, but it was like the words were stuck, lodged somewhere deep inside her chest. Finally, she spoke again, her voice trembling, cracking under the weight of the truth. "My daughter needs surgery," she said, her words falling like stones between them. "Her heart condition is getting worse, and I can't afford it." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had heard countless stories of hardship over the years, of employees struggling to make ends meet. But this was different. Maria wasn't just worried about making rent or paying bills. She was fighting for her daughter's life,
and every day she stepped into this store, she was risking it all for a paycheck that couldn't even guarantee her the health insurance she needed to save her child. "I'm so sorry," Marcus said quietly, his voice softer now, the weight of her words settling over him. He wanted to reach out, to offer something, but he knew that wasn't enough. No simple words could change the reality she was facing. The truth was far worse than he had ever imagined. Maria looked up at him then, and for the first time, he saw the full depth of what she was carrying. The years of struggling, the guilt of not being able to provide, the overwhelming fear of what might happen if things didn't change. I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered, shaking her head slightly, as if admitting the truth was too much to bear. "Every week they cut my hours, and every week I'm one step closer to losing everything. My daughter, she's everything to me."
The words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Marcus stood frozen, unsure of what to say next. He had no easy answers, no comforting words to offer. The reality of Maria's situation was brutal, undeniable, and far beyond what he had imagined when he walked into the store. But in that moment, he knew something had to change. The stories he had been told about employee satisfaction, about policies and promises, it all felt so empty now. Maria wasn't just another employee on a spreadsheet. She was a mother, fighting for her child, struggling with a system that was failing her every step of the way. He could feel the weight of that realization sink in. He wasn't just here to observe. He wasn't just a CEO playing at being a regular worker. He was here to fix this, for Maria, for every single person in this store who had been quietly suffering, unnoticed. Maria looked up again, her hands still trembling as she clasped her name badge. She was trying to hold it all together, but the cracks were showing. And Marcus realized, for the first time, that this wasn't just about saving one employee or one moment. It was about saving everything. "I'm going to help you, Maria," he said, the words leaving his mouth before he even fully understood what they meant. "I don't know how yet, but I promise you, things are going to change."
The words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Marcus stood frozen, unsure of what to say next. He had no easy answers, no comforting words to offer. The reality of Maria's situation was brutal, undeniable, and far beyond what he had imagined when he walked into the store. But in that moment, he knew something had to change. The stories he had been told about employee satisfaction, about policies and promises, it all felt so empty now. Maria wasn't just another employee on a spreadsheet. She was a mother, fighting for her child, struggling with a system that was failing her every step of the way. He could feel the weight of that realization sink in. He wasn't just here to observe. He wasn't just a CEO playing at being a regular worker. He was here to fix this. For Maria, for every single person in this store who had been quietly suffering, unnoticed. Maria looked up again, her hands still trembling as she clasped her name badge. She was trying to hold it all together, but the cracks were showing. And Marcus realized for the first time that this wasn't just about saving one employee or one moment. It was about saving everything. "I'm going to help you, Maria," he said, the words leaving his mouth before he even fully understood what they meant. "I don't know how yet, but I promise you,
Things are going to change.
Maria met his eyes then, and for the briefest of moments, there was a flicker of hope there. Just enough to make Marcus believe that maybe, just maybe, he could do something to fix this. But that hope was fragile, and Marcus knew that it would take more than just words to make good on that promise. It would take action. And that action, the real work, was just beginning. Maria's hands shook slightly as she spoke, her fingers tightly clutching the edge of her uniform. She wouldn't meet Marcus's eyes, her gaze fixed on the floor between them, as though she couldn't bear to look up and face the man who represented everything that had failed her. The tension in the air thickened as she spoke, her voice quiet but steady, each word heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. "My hours are cut every week," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm never sure how much I'll get paid. And my health insurance? I don't even know if I'm eligible." The words hung in the space between them, and Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him. This wasn't just another story of poor management or an oversight that could be fixed with a few policy changes. No, this was something far more insidious, something deliberate, something designed to keep people like Maria from ever getting ahead.
Maria's voice faltered for a moment, and Marcus saw the deep strain in her face, the exhaustion that had settled into the lines of her skin. This wasn't just about missed shifts or a paycheck that didn't stretch far enough to cover her bills. This was about a system, a carefully constructed system that had been designed to keep her and people like her on the edge, always struggling, always fighting for something as basic as stability. Marcus could hardly process what she was saying. He had expected to find inefficiencies, maybe some miscommunication between departments, but this was something else. This wasn't poor management. This was intentional manipulation. Every time Maria asked for her hours to be fixed, every time she asked for more consistent work, the answer was always the same. Sorry, corporate policy. And now, standing here in front of him, it was clear that this wasn't just a fluke. It wasn't just one location's failing or a misguided policy. This was a pattern, a well-oiled machine that kept Maria's paycheck on the edge of survival, just enough to keep her coming back for more. Her hands fidgeted with the sleeve of her uniform, tugging at the fabric as she spoke, but there was something in her eyes now, a flicker of something that Marcus couldn't place, but it made his stomach churn. It was a mixture of resignation and frustration, as though she had fought this fight every day, only to be told that the rules were out of her control, that she was powerless in a system that didn't care.
"I've asked," she continued, her voice almost breaking. "I've asked for better hours, for more stability, but it's always the same. They tell me it's corporate, that my hours are too unpredictable for me to be eligible for anything, even health insurance. They say I'm not full-time enough, but I am. I've been working full-time hours for years. They change the schedule every week. I don't know what I'm working from one week to the next." Marcus felt his blood run cold. He thought back to the reports he'd seen on his desk, glowing performance reviews, perfect employee satisfaction scores. He had never seen anything about employees struggling, about workers being manipulated this way. How could something so fundamental be buried beneath layers of positive reports? How could it be that the people he trusted, the managers, the ones who assured him everything was going smoothly, had allowed this to happen? Maria's eyes finally lifted to meet his, her gaze haunted and tired. "I've been here 3 years, Marcus. I've never missed a day. I'm always on time, and they keep cutting my hours. How am I supposed to take care of my daughter, to make sure she gets the surgery she needs, when I don't even know how much I'm going to make each week?" Her words pierced through Marcus like a dagger. He had never heard the full weight of what his employees faced, had never truly seen it before. The reality of Maria's situation wasn't just a fluke of poor scheduling. It was an intentional strategy to keep employees like her at arm's length from the things that could make their lives better. Health insurance, a steady paycheck, stability.
All of those were just out of reach, and the system had been built to keep it that way.
Maria's life wasn't a string of bad luck. It was the result of a system that made sure she would always be one misstep away from losing everything. And it wasn't just Maria. The more Marcus thought about it, the more he realized this was happening to other employees too. Tommy in electronics, Sarah in cosmetics. The pieces were falling into place. And what he saw wasn't a company that cared for its people, but a company that used them up and threw them aside. "I don't know how you do it," Marcus said quietly, the weight of her words pressing heavily on him. "You're carrying all of this on your own." Maria shrugged, a small, defeated gesture. "What choice do I have?" she asked, her voice a little stronger now, though the exhaustion still hung on her like a second skin. "I can't quit. I need this job. My daughter needs me to hold it together." Marcus stood there, processing everything she had just revealed. The sense of guilt gnawed at him. How had he missed this? How had he not seen that his company, his creation, was built on the backs of people like Maria, who were struggling in ways that no one would ever know? He had been so focused on the corporate side, on the profits, on the bottom line, that he had missed the real story, the human cost of it all. But the more Marcus thought about it, the more one thing became clear. He couldn't let this go, not anymore. The system that had allowed this, that had allowed Maria to be treated this way, was broken. And it wasn't just broken for her, it was broken for everyone who had been taken advantage of in the same way.
Maria's struggle had opened his eyes, but it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the hundreds of other employees who were quietly suffering, who would never speak up, who were stuck in the same cycle of exploitation. He had to fix this. He had to do better. For Maria, for every person who walked into his stores thinking that the system would take care of them, only to realize that it had been rigged against them from the start. "Maria," he said, his voice firm now, a promise settling in his chest, "I'm going to fix this. I don't know how yet, but we're going to make sure you and everyone else here gets the stability you deserve. This isn't right." Maria didn't answer at first. She just stared at him, a mixture of disbelief and hope creeping into her tired eyes. She had heard promises before, so many times from so many people, but for the first time, there was something different in his tone, something that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that change was possible. But Marcus knew that believing wasn't enough. He would need to act. And he was just beginning to understand how deep the problem ran. As Marcus spent more time on the floor, moving through the aisles like just another worker, he started to notice the faces, the ones that were all too familiar yet completely foreign. It wasn't just Maria. It wasn't just one or two isolated cases. The more he observed, the more the stories began to overlap, like a web of hidden struggles woven through the very fabric of the store. His first encounter was Tommy, the quiet guy working in electronics. Tommy had a hard edge about him, a wariness that came from long hours and short breaks. Marcus had seen him before. He'd passed by the electronics section a few times, but never took a second look. Today, though, was different. Today, Marcus was looking at everything through a different lens, and it didn't take long for him to realize that Tommy wasn't just the friendly tech guy who helped customers find their new gadgets.
"Hey, Tommy, how's it going?" Marcus asked casually, as if they were two regular employees chatting between shifts. Tommy glanced up from a stack of returns, his tired eyes meeting Marcus's. "Same as always," Tommy muttered, shaking his head as he wiped his hands on his work shirt. "Filling shelves, helping customers, you know the drill." But there was something in his voice that caught Marcus's attention, something that didn't sit right. Tommy's words were detached, like someone who had been through this routine so many times it had become the ghost of his former self. "How are the hours going?" Marcus pressed, his curiosity piqued. Tommy paused, looking around the store as if to make sure no one was listening. "Hours?
You mean the ones that change every week? They cut my shifts last week, down to 15 hours. I've been working part-time hours for over a year now. At this rate, I'm never going to get my benefits. They keep saying I'm not full-time enough, but it's like they're doing everything they can to keep me under that threshold. Marcus felt a pit in his stomach. This wasn't just bad scheduling. This was deliberate. Tommy, just like Maria, was stuck in a cycle where he worked full-time hours, but the company made sure his hours were fluctuating enough to avoid the benefits he deserved. The system was built to exploit, not to care for.
Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper as he leaned closer. And if you ask too many questions, you get pulled into Brad's office. He tells you to be grateful for the hours you get, then turns around and gives your shifts to some new hire who doesn't know how to do the job. Tommy's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. You speak up, you get punished. Marcus's mind raced. Brad Miller's name came up again. Another manager, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. This wasn't just one rogue employee or an isolated manager. This was a culture of fear, a system designed to grind people down until they stopped asking for more. Marcus moved through the aisles, his thoughts churning as he scanned the store's sections. He couldn't shake Tommy's words. How deep did this go? How many employees were caught in this same trap? The answer came quickly, in the form of Sarah, the pregnant woman working in cosmetics. She was arranging displays near the front of the store when Marcus walked by. He had noticed her before, always quick with a smile, her hands expertly managing the products. But today, she seemed different. There was an exhaustion in her step, and her eyes were hollow, like she was running on fumes. "Sarah," Marcus called, making his way over to her. She looked up, startled for a moment, but quickly masked it with a tight smile. "How's everything going today?" "Good, good." She answered too quickly, her voice high-pitched, as though she was trying too hard to convince herself. "Busy, holiday season, but it's all right." Something didn't sit right in the way she spoke. It was like she was holding back. "You sure?" Marcus asked. "You look a little tired." At the mention of exhaustion, Sarah hesitated, her smile faltering for the first time. She glanced down at her rounded belly, then back up at him, her eyes momentarily brimming with unspoken frustration. "Look," she started, lowering her voice. "I'm pregnant, and they keep scheduling me for shifts that I can barely handle anymore. I've had to work late into the night, even though I've been asking for lighter shifts. But it's never enough. And when I ask for the days I need to take care of myself, well, you know what Brad says." Marcus felt a sense of recognition in Sarah's words, but it wasn't just about the physical toll of working while pregnant. It was something deeper. The fact that Sarah felt like she had no choice but to keep pushing herself, even when her body was screaming for rest. "He says I'm lucky to have a job at all. He reminds me that a lot of people would want my hours, that if I keep asking for time off, maybe I shouldn't be here." Sarah's hands fidgeted with a tube of lipstick, the colors blurring in her shaking hands. "It's hard to ask for help when you know they'll just turn it against you." Marcus's anger rose, but he kept his voice steady. This wasn't just about Sarah, or Tommy, or Maria. It was about every employee in this store, every person who had been silenced, pushed aside, or manipulated. The pattern was clear now. They had all been fed the same line: work harder, speak less. As Marcus continued through the store, it became painfully obvious. The deeper he dug, the more the cracks in the system widened, revealing a web of exploitation that stretched across departments, from custodial to sales, from electronics to cosmetics. Every corner he turned, every face he met, told the same story. Inconsistent hours, denied benefits, fear of retaliation. It was all part of the same machine, one that chewed people up and spat them out, making sure they stayed just hungry enough to keep coming back, but never full enough to fight back. Marcus met several other employees as he walked through the store.
Sarah's story mirrored by others who had suffered in silence. Some shared their frustrations quietly, as though afraid to speak too loudly, while others tried to laugh it off, making light of their dire situations. But Marcus could see it in their eyes, the exhaustion, the resentment, the quiet defeat. He realized that what he was seeing wasn't just a few isolated cases. This wasn't just bad luck or poor management. This was a carefully orchestrated system, a pattern of abuse that stretched far beyond the store's walls. And now, it was all coming to light. The deeper he went, the more he understood. This wasn't an issue of isolated mismanagement. It was a culture of fear and exploitation. It was a system designed to break people down until they no longer had the strength to ask for what they deserved. And Marcus had been blind to it all. But not anymore. Now that he understood, he couldn't walk away, not without making things right. Maria's eyes softened as she spoke of her daughter, and for the first time there was a glimmer of something other than exhaustion, a flicker of something deeply personal, something that cut straight to the heart of why she was standing there, vulnerable yet strong, struggling yet determined.
"Sophia," she began, her voice wavering as she said her daughter's name, almost like saying it out loud made the situation even more real. "She needs surgery, Marcus. Her heart condition is worsening." Maria's voice trembled, and she paused for a moment, swallowing hard, trying to keep her composure. "If I don't get consistent hours, I can't pay for her care." The words hung in the air between them like a heavy weight, and for the first time, Marcus understood the depth of Maria's struggle. This wasn't just about surviving day to day in a job that barely paid the bills. This was about a mother fighting for her child's life, fighting against a system that had made it almost impossible for her to get the help she so desperately needed. Maria continued, her voice quieter now, as if she were sharing a burden she had carried alone for too long. "The system doesn't care. It doesn't care about my daughter, and it doesn't care about me. I just need to know that I can pay for her surgery, pay for her future." Marcus's chest tightened as he listened. He had seen employees struggle before, but this was different. This wasn't just a financial hardship. This was a mother's desperation, her fear of losing her child to a condition that could be fixed if only she could afford it. Her words echoed in his mind. The system doesn't care. The harsh truth of it hit him like a wave. The company he had built, the one he thought was doing well, wasn't working for Maria. It wasn't working for people like her. This wasn't just bad scheduling or mistakes made by an overburdened staff. This was deliberate. By keeping employees like Maria from accessing the benefits they were entitled to, they were forced to live in a constant state of uncertainty, unable to plan for the future. "How long has she been sick?" Marcus asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. He needed to understand. He needed to know what Maria was going through, to feel the weight of her struggle. Maria's face tightened, her eyes clouding with the weight of the truth. "She's 8, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Her heart condition was diagnosed when she was 3, but it's getting worse. The doctors say that if we don't get the surgery soon, she could go into heart failure. I've been working as much as I can, trying to get the money together, but it's never enough." The injustice of it hit Marcus harder than he expected. This wasn't just about Maria's job, it was about the fact that the very system she depended on to support her family was failing her. "I can't do this much longer," Maria said, her voice cracking. "I need consistent hours. I need health insurance. I need to know that I can give my daughter the future she deserves." Marcus felt a deep, painful realization settle in. The company he had built, his life's work, wasn't just missing the mark, it was actively hurting people like Maria. And in that moment, he knew he had to do something. He couldn't walk away from this. "I'll fix this," he said quietly. "I don't know how yet, but I will." Marcus had always been a man who thrived in power. Tailored suits, polished shoes, and the confidence that came from years of building an empire. But now, as he looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror of a rundown motel bathroom, he barely recognized the man staring back. Gone was the polished CEO, the mastermind behind Thompson Enterprises. Instead, in his place stood Mike Henderson, a laid-off construction worker with rough hands and a face weathered by years of hard labor.
The transformation was jarring. Marcus pulled on a faded pair of jeans, worn and torn at the knees, and a cheap, oversized hoodie he'd bought from a second-hand store. His usual crisp demeanor was replaced with a hunched posture, a weariness that he hadn't felt in years. The rich cologne he wore to business meetings had been swapped for the harsh scent of industrial soap. He stood there for a moment, studying the reflection of the man he had become. He could still feel the weight of his usual power, but it was now buried beneath layers of discomfort, both physical and psychological. Becoming Mike Henderson wasn't just about the clothes. It was about stepping into a world he had long ignored, one where survival depended on just getting by. In the boardrooms, he had been a leader. Here, he was just another worker, invisible to those around him. But that invisibility was exactly what he needed. It was the key to seeing the truth, to understanding what had gone wrong in his company. As he walked out of the motel room, his heart raced with an unfamiliar fear. The CEO of Thompson Enterprises wasn't supposed to feel afraid. But today, Marcus wasn't the CEO. Today, he was Mike Henderson, and blending in was more important than ever. Marcus stood hidden in the corner of the break room, his back pressed against the cold metal of a shelf, watching through the narrow crack of the office door. Inside, Brad Miller sat hunched over his desk, tapping away at the keyboard with quick, practiced movements. Marcus could feel his pulse quicken as he watched the man, once just a name on a performance review, now the embodiment of everything that had gone wrong in his company. Brad didn't notice Marcus's presence. He was too absorbed in his work, too absorbed in the manipulation unfolding on his screen. Marcus's eyes flicked to the monitor. What he saw made his stomach churn. Brad was altering the schedule, cutting shifts for certain employees, adding hours for others who didn't even exist. He clicked through the system, erasing and changing records with casual ease, like it was second nature to him. The numbers blurred together, but Marcus could see the pattern emerging clearly. Brad was strategically reducing the hours of workers who were full-time, keeping them just below the threshold for health benefits. Then, without hesitation, he created fake employee profiles, assigning hours to phantom workers, workers who never showed up, who never existed. But those hours were real. The money, the wages, those were real. Anger surged through Marcus's veins, burning hotter with each click of Brad's mouse. This wasn't just a few minor mistakes. This was a deliberate, systematic effort to take advantage of his employees, to rob them of what they were owed, while pocketing the difference himself. Marcus's fists clenched, his jaw tightening as the depth of Brad's betrayal sank in. This wasn't just poor management. This was exploitation on a massive scale. It was sickening to watch. Marcus had trusted Brad, had believed in his ability to lead. But what he was witnessing wasn't leadership. It was a calculated abuse of power. The tension in Marcus's chest grew unbearable. He couldn't let this go. Not anymore. Marcus watched from the doorway, his chest tightening with each passing second. Brad Miller sat behind his desk, leaning back in his chair with a smug, almost bored expression on his face. He tapped his pen against the wood, the rhythmic sound echoing through the quiet office. It was the kind of relaxed posture that came from someone who had all the power, someone who had no fear of being caught. Brad was at the top of his world, and everyone around him was just a pawn to manipulate.
With one hand casually draped over the back of his chair, Brad scrolled through the timesheets on his computer, his fingers moving with a practiced ease. His eyes flicked from the screen to a folder on his desk, filled with employee records that Marcus knew were about to be tampered with again. Brad's voice broke the silence, dripping with a tone of superiority that made Marcus's blood boil. "The Santos woman's perfect for this job," Brad said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. "She'll never complain." He chuckled to himself, clearly pleased with his own words. "She's just desperate enough to do whatever we ask." Marcus's fists clenched at his sides. The casual cruelty in Brad's voice hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He had heard rumors, seen the evidence piling up, but hearing Brad speak so easily about Maria, his employee, a mother fighting to save her child, felt like a slap in the face. Brad's dismissive tone, his complete disregard for the lives of the people who worked for him, made it clear just how deeply corrupted he was. Brad continued, his eyes scanning the numbers on his screen, never once looking up. "She'll keep showing up for whatever scraps we throw her way. Health insurance, hours, respect, doesn't matter to her. She just needs the paycheck." His smirk grew wider, the arrogance practically oozing from him. In that moment, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The anger that had been bubbling beneath the surface, the frustration, the disbelief, it all came crashing down at once. This wasn't just bad management. This was exploitation on a scale that went beyond anything he could have imagined. Brad wasn't just a manager who made poor decisions. He was a predator, taking advantage of people who had no choice but to keep working under his thumb.
Marcus stood there, motionless, his heart pounding in his chest. The more he listened, the more disgusted he became. Brad had manipulated the system, sure, but worse than that, he had exploited the very souls of his employees, using their desperation against them. And he didn't care, not one bit. Brad's words echoed in Marcus's mind like a dagger. "She'll never complain." Maria's voice, trembling with fear and worry, flashed through his mind. He thought of her, of the stress she was under, the fight for her daughter's future, the desperation in her eyes. And to hear Brad speak of her like she was nothing, just another pawn in his game, was more than Marcus could bear. This wasn't just an isolated issue. It wasn't just about one employee or one store. This was the product of a culture built on cruelty and manipulation. Brad had to be stopped, not just for Maria, but for every person he had exploited in the name of his own power. Marcus took a deep breath, the realization hitting him with full force. He couldn't let this go any longer. Brad had to pay for what he had done, not just to Maria, but to all of them. And Marcus was going to be the one to make sure that happened. The room went dead silent. It felt as though the air itself had frozen, hanging in thick tension. Marcus stepped forward, his movements deliberate and slow. The man who had been Mike Henderson, the desperate worker in worn jeans and a hoodie, was gone. In his place stood the real Marcus Thompson, the CEO of Thompson Enterprises. His posture was taller, his presence more commanding. His calm demeanor cut through the room like a knife. The employees, their faces a mix of confusion and shock, watched as Marcus pulled out a small, gleaming badge. He held it up for all to see. "I'm Marcus Thompson," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that resonated with the truth in his words. "You're done, Brad. This ends now." The impact of his revelation hit Brad like a freight train. His smug expression faltered, his eyes widening in disbelief as the reality of the situation sank in. The employees who had been so afraid to speak up, who had lived in constant fear of Brad's threats, now stood frozen in place, stunned by the turn of events. The man who had terrorized them was now exposed, his cruelty no longer hidden behind a mask of authority.
Brad's confidence evaporated in an instant. His grip on his chair tightened, his smugness quickly replaced by panic. Marcus's words hung in the air, final and unyielding. This was no longer just a confrontation. It was a reckoning. And for Brad Miller, there was no escaping the truth. As Brad was escorted out, his face pale and contorted with anger, Marcus turned to the employees, his voice steady but laced with a quiet authority that commanded attention. The tension in the room was thick, the kind of silence that only came after a storm. The moment had arrived. "Maria," Marcus said, his eyes meeting hers, "you're the new manager of this store. You deserve it."
The words hit Maria like a wave. For a split second, she stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled as they hung by her sides, her heart racing. The woman who had once mopped the floors, whose shifts were filled with nothing but back-breaking labor and unseen sacrifice, was now being handed the keys to the store. It wasn't just a new title, it was a life-altering transformation, a chance to take control of her own destiny in a way she had never thought possible. Her mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what Marcus had just said. She had spent years scrubbing toilets, cleaning aisles, and scraping by, always doing her best, but never imagining this kind of opportunity would be hers. She had heard of managers, seen them walk past her while she worked, but never once imagined she could be one of them. The other employees stood in stunned silence, their eyes flicking between Marcus and Maria. Some watched with disbelief, others with awe, as if trying to comprehend the weight of what was happening before them. Maria, still standing motionless, finally found her voice, barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can," she stammered, her voice cracking with emotion. Her eyes welled up as she glanced around at the faces she had known for years. "I've never managed anything before." But Marcus simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. "You've managed everything, Maria. You've managed your life, your family, your struggles. You've been leading by example without even realizing it. Now it's time to lead this store the way it deserves." As Maria's eyes scanned the room, she saw something shift in the faces of her coworkers. What had once been fear and uncertainty was now replaced with something else: hope. She wasn't just taking a job, she was stepping into a new role that would affect everyone in that room. The respect, the recognition, it was all there, as if the walls of doubt had come down and Maria had found herself standing tall in a way she had never had before. Her hands still shook, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the sheer weight of what Marcus had entrusted to her. Slowly, she reached up to wipe away a tear. The same woman who had scrubbed floors and cleaned bathrooms now found herself on the precipice of something incredible. For the first time, Maria realized that her life could be different, not just for her, but for her daughter, for everyone who had suffered under a broken system. With a deep breath, she nodded. "I'll do it," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with a resolve she didn't know she had. "I'll do it." The room erupted in a quiet cheer, a murmur of approval that filled the space. And in that moment, Maria felt something she'd never allowed herself to feel before: empowerment. She wasn't just a janitor anymore. She was a leader. And this was only the beginning. Marcus stood before the employees, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "No one here will suffer again. Every stolen wage, every denied benefit, it will be made right." The words hung in the air, carrying the weight of a promise that had been long overdue. For the first time, the employees looked at each other, uncertainty replaced by something else: hope. Maria stood among them, her face a mixture of disbelief and relief. The fear that had clouded their lives for so long was finally beginning to lift. For the first time in years, they felt seen.
truly seen, by someone who had the power to make things right. The change wasn't just a promise, it was happening. Marcus wasn't offering empty words. He had already made the necessary calls, started the process of wage restoration, and put new policies in place to ensure no one would be exploited again. Health insurance, consistent hours, fair pay, these were no longer just ideals, they were becoming a reality.
In that moment, the room filled with a quiet but undeniable shift. The employees weren't just waiting for change to come, they were living it. It wasn't just about the reforms, it was about being heard, respected, and valued. And for the first time, Marcus knew he was on the path to fixing the system he had unknowingly built against them. Marcus reflected on how the last few weeks had changed him. He'd thought he was a great CEO, but the truth was, he'd been blind to the real issues. He had spent years focused on profits, growth, and expansion, measuring success by numbers on a spreadsheet. But as he looked back on everything he had learned, the reality hit him hard. It wasn't just about profits, it was about people. The employees, the ones he had built his company on, had been forgotten in the pursuit of success. He had been so caught up in the vision of a thriving empire that he had failed to see the struggles of the very people who made it all possible. The long hours, the exploitation, the fear that held them captive, it had all been invisible to him. But now, after everything he had witnessed, after seeing the human side of his business, Marcus understood what true leadership really meant. True leadership wasn't about sitting in a corner office making high-level decisions. It wasn't about the accolades or the power. True leadership was about serving those you lead. It was about being in the trenches, understanding the challenges your people face, and doing everything in your power to make their lives better.
Marcus knew that he couldn't undo the mistakes of the past, but he could ensure that from this point forward, he would lead with a new purpose. A purpose rooted in compassion, fairness, and a deep respect for the people who had always been the backbone of his company. Maria's idea for industry reform had taken shape. Worker-verified certifications, a system designed to hold companies accountable for their treatment of employees, were now in motion. The concept, born from the struggles of those like Maria who had been silenced for too long, was starting to take root beyond the walls of Thompson Enterprises. It was a game changer, an initiative that would ensure fairness, transparency, and a standard of ethical business practices that companies could no longer ignore. Thompson Enterprises had become a beacon for this new way of doing business, proving that companies could thrive not just on profits, but on fairness and respect for their workers. As Marcus championed this shift, it wasn't just the company's bottom line that was transforming, it was the very culture of business itself. The new systems in place weren't just promises, they were practical steps toward real change. The ripple effect was just beginning. As the news spread, other companies took notice, and soon the idea of worker-verified certifications gained momentum. It wasn't long before industry leaders began adopting similar practices, realizing that treating workers well wasn't just the right thing to do, it was good for business. Marcus's decision to put people first wasn't just a one-time fix for Thompson Enterprises, it was setting a precedent for an entire industry, one that would inspire other leaders to follow suit.
The change wasn't just personal for Marcus or Maria, it was part of something much larger. What had started as a simple step toward fairness had blossomed into a movement that would reshape industries and give power back to the people who had always been its backbone. The future looked different now, and it was a future built on trust, respect, and the recognition that every worker's dignity mattered.